No matter what you do, you can't escape them. No matter how far you run, they will find you. Even though we have very little historical evidence to suggest how they were used in the past, they are absolutely everywhere now. They're even at the very top of your smartphone. There's even one at the very start of this channel, and there's even one on my own arm. Hello, my name is Jacob, and I'm a Norse Pagan, and today we're going to be talking about Bindrunes, historically and within the Norse faith today. Before we dive too deeply into the history of Bindrunes, I think it's important to really define what they are. Really, a Bindrune is just a combination of at least two runes to create a different meaning. So really, what we're exploring throughout this video is how were Bindrunes used historically, because as we're going to find out, they were used for very different things in the past than they are currently. Now, I should say that I am not a scholar. I don't have a degree in this. I am simply a Norse pagan practicing this faith today, sharing with you what I can dig up on the internet and within the sources that I have, but also what I experienced throughout my own explorations of this faith. So if you do want to look at a more historical video, a very dry, to-the-point video, I have to recommend Jackson Crawford. I think many of us know his channel at this point, but he does have a video. It's called Real and Historic Rune Spells. This is where I found the majority of my historical information, as well as some sources online. So if you watch his video, you're going to be kind of crushed like I was. You're going to find out that runes, at least as Bindrunes in the past, were really just combined vowel sounds, combined, to make different sounds within the runic alphabet. And we have very little historical evidence to really suggest they were used for anything different, at least in the pre-Christian past. And most of our information comes from the Viking Age anyways, which many of us know is kind of the end of Norse paganism. One piece of evidence that I do think is pretty significant comes from a runestone, and it is runestone SO158. This runestone actually features a vertical binds rune, which is rare from what I can tell from much of the historical evidence. And even then, it's still not a spell from what we can tell. It really is just a symbol and a linguistic way to establish who this person was that the runestone is being dedicated to. The thing that I like about this is it is actually very aesthetically pleasing. It's not just two runes, it's actually multiple runes strung together. So really, it isn't until the 1800s that we get enough evidence to suggest that Bindrunes were being used in a very, magical way, or at least were being explored, more in detail. Or perhaps this was really just the first time they were recorded. That's one of the most complicated things about this faith and the exploring the history behind it, because just because we don't have evidence doesn't mean that it wasn't used in that matter. For all we know, everyone was tattooed with Bindrunes in the past, and we just don't have evidence to say otherwise. But because we have zero evidence, we can't say definitively one way or another and to what extent Bindrunes were used. From what we can tell historically, it's just a linguistic thing. And then from the 1600s, we can kind of say, oh, they were starting to morph into some form of spell work, but we really don't know to what extent it was. And then the 1800s is when we can say pretty definitively, yes, this is where Bindrunes were used and they were being explored further. This is also when we begin to see a lot of scholars and educated people begin to record runology. It's really hard to say where they're getting this information, if these runologists were just exploring this and recording it, if they weren't having any historical backbone. But I mean, also, if someone sat down and studied the runes all their life and then wrote down what they learned, I mean, really that's just an evolution of the faith, just an evolution of our understanding of runes. So again, it's hard to say how much we should take this, the 1800s runologists seriously, and that's kind of really where we are left with Bindrunes is, do we take the fact that they were really creations of between 16 and 1800 and really just the 1800s, do we take that as, proof enough that they work? It's hard to say, and that's really up to you. The last thing I'll say historically is, of course, in the Havamal, we do have evidence that the runes were magical because we have Odin hanging from the world tree. He took up the runes and they taught him spells. But we really don't know what runes go to what spells, or if it really was the Elder Futhark or not. So from the Havamal, at least, we can say historically that runes do have a magical purpose. It's just hard to say to what extent that magical purpose was and how widespread it was. But as you'll see from the poll I actually took, most people seem to think that runes do have some form of magical value, or at least Bindrunes do. And actually this poll comes from about 1,700 votes, and 51% of people believe, that took place in this poll, that Bindrunes do have some form of magical property, whereas only 5% do not believe they have any form of magical connection. Whereas 44% of people were unsure about Bindrunes. So I do hope this video helps out those 44% to help understand them better. So the last part of this video is going to be looking at Bindrune usage today, or at the very least the two major ways that people use them today. Now naturally, you can still use them linguistically, but I really doubt that most people are watching this video to learn how to use Bindrunes linguistically. They're really looking for the Norse Pagan perspective. So I do want to take a brief pause here in the middle of the video, but continue on to the next section to talk about the Wisdom of Odin. First off, thank you so much for watching these videos, and for the people that have been here since day one, you're awesome. And for the people that have seen every one of my videos, I'm so sorry. But if you love the content here at the Wisdom of Odin, please think about donating to Patreon. It really is the only way I'm able to do this full time. And I do try to offer plenty of benefits to go along with it, including early access videos, as well as our community Discord. So, you know, I mean, I really don't know how else to sell this. I mean, truly, Patreon is the only way I'm able to do this full time, and your support means the world to me. And as I'm starting to take a step back from Instagram, Patreon and Discord are really the best ways to reach me. But truly, whatever support you can provide, thank you so much. I'm hoping you're enjoying this video and the content here at the Wisdom of Odin. All right, back to Bindrunes. So the two different ways to look at Bindrunes today, at least in a Norse Pagan way, I would say are symbols, as symbols of something, and then actually as magical spells. So we're going to be looking at those two things. First, I want to explore them as symbols because this is something I can actually connect with a little bit more deeply, and I feel like I can give you better information. The majority of my magical information is going to come from the woman that taught me my runes, like basically all I know about the runes. And if you want to learn more from her, I have an entire video basically answering questions on runes that I gave her and then, you know, shared with you. She's a very private person, but she wants to give back in some way, kind of through me. So the last section of this video will really just be, you know, what I've learned from her and from other people that are more inclined to the magical uses of the runes. But as far as runes as a symbol, I think, you know, the best example to look at is something that exists at the top of everyone's phones today, the Bluetooth symbol. So the Bluetooth symbol is actually a Bindrune, believe it or not. Most people don't even know this. So it's a combination of Hagalaz or Hagel and Berkana. And so it's not necessarily a spell. This doesn't mean, you know, femininity and like natural pain. This means Herald Bluetooth. It was his initials. So you might be thinking, well, why does Herald Bluetooth have anything to do with Bluetooth connectivity? So first off, Bluetooth connectivity is the relationship between two devices. So my camera here can Bluetooth connect to my laptop to send files without a cable. So that is really what Bluetooth is. You know, you have Bluetooth headphones, you have Bluetooth smartwatches now. I mean, Bluetooth is absolutely everywhere. There are millions, if not billions of devices that use Bluetooth now. So where is this from? The story is actually kind of fun. So the reason that Bluetooth was used as the symbol and the name for this, you know, really this way of connecting devices in our modern age is because Herald Bluetooth was actually renowned as a leader that unified groups of, you know, I believe it was Danes at the time that were not communicating. There was no communication between them. And so within his lifetime, he actually established communication between groups of individuals that had no form of communication. So that is actually why the Bluetooth symbol is what we have today, because it establishes communication between devices or groups or individuals that normally don't communicate. There's your fun fact for the day. So again, I don't think, you know, maybe there's some magical implementation behind the Bluetooth symbol, but really it is just a symbol for Herald Bluetooth. Another one we can actually look at is actually the tattoo I have right here. So this is a tattoo of obviously Fehu and Yera. There is actually no magical reason for me getting this tattoo. I got it from our first gathering. You know, it was actually the first hand poke tattoo that Caleb within the community did for somebody else. I volunteered as tribute, basically. But really, I wanted to get this tattoo to really remember that day. I didn't get Fehu to represent, wealth and prosperity. I got it to represent, Freya as being one of the spring deities. I didn't get Yera on here to be a magical representation of the cycles. I got it because we're having seasonal gatherings. That was kind of the plan. So yes, this is a rune symbol for that moment in my life. It is to remind me of that day. And anytime I use it, it really is to symbolize that first gathering. It is in this moment that I also want to bring up bands. So many bands out there use Bindrunes within their, lettering, within their, really their merch. And one of the most respected members of this community, or at least the Norse Pagan influence sphere, is probably Einar Selvik. And Wardruna itself uses Bindrunes, really throughout its album artwork. Now, again, this might not be Einar Selvik, but he tends to, micromanage a lot of it within Wardruna, it seems like. So chances are he did choose to put them in there. Now, are these magical? Perhaps, but at the very least, they stand for a symbol of the band. And so that's the other thing I think Bindrunes can really be, at least in the symbol department, is a symbol of, personal identification. I mean, you see it within the Wisdom of Odin logo itself. Now, there might be a little bit of a spell behind it now that I reflected on it a little bit, but really, this symbol is the Wisdom of Odin. So when you see it, you recognize my brand. So, if you wear a t-shirt, if I wear a t-shirt, and someone sees it, they're like, oh, you watch the Wisdom of Odin. A lot of people think it's a Web of Weird, but Web of Weird actually have more little interchanging lines in there. So another example I'll use, this is actually kind of a fun one because I'm reading through the Fellowship of the Ring again, and this is the first time I've read through it as a Norse Pagan. It's been years since I've read it. And one of the things I find really interesting, especially coming into this video, is the fact that Gandalf signs his name Gandalf and then puts a rune afterwards, and that's actually a Fehu rune with some dots around it. And he also uses this as the symbol for the dwarves coming to Bilbo's house. And again, it's how he signs his name. So if you really wanted to use a Bindrune as a symbol for yourself, as a personal signature, I think that would be really cool, and I think that would be an interesting way to bring your faith into your everyday. When you sign your name, you sign, a special sigil right next to it that you created. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be magical, but it can represent you. And I do think this is, again, the reason why most bands use it is because Bindrunes can be created to represent a band. You see, you see Osi and the Jupiter, Wardruna, Skald, Heilung, and honestly, so many others. I think Gjaldir uses them as well. So many bands use Bindrunes to personally identify that band. So again, I think this is a really great thing that you can do without really looking into too much depth of Bindrunes. The magical side of it, again, is something that I'm kind of wary of myself. So as we move into that, if you like the look of Bindrunes, let's be real. Most people just like the look of them. They look really cool, and that's why you see them on tattoos on everybody. You see them all over Instagram, see them all over bands, see them all over merch. So a lot of times I think these Bindrunes don't have, true value. They just look cool. And honestly, that's okay. But don't go into the magical side of things unless you really want to, delve deeper. It's really a discipline. It's not something you can just learn overnight, as I'm finding. But if you just like Bindrunes because they look cool and you want them to symbolize something like this tattoo here, that's great. End the video. You don't have to watch anymore. But if you want to learn more about Bindrunes in the magical context, this last section of the video is for you. Okay, so the disclaimer for this part of the video. Once again, this is not something that I'm personally delving into. This tattoo is a magical Bindrune, but this was developed by, or at least co-developed with my rune teacher. And I'm glad I did, because otherwise something might have went wrong. And again, referring to that poll, 51% of people believe in the power of Bindrunes, whereas only 5% don't. And again, historically, we really don't have much evidence to suggest that they are magical, or at least were used magical in a magical way in the Viking Age. But that's one of the ways they're used now. And do I believe in the power of Bindrunes? What part am I in this poll? I think I do believe in their power, just simply because I've kind of experienced it, and I know some really knowledgeable people that believe in their power as well. So as we dive into this, remember, most of this information isn't necessarily coming from me. This is coming from the woman that taught me the runes, and as well as coming from other people who have written books on runes and know the runes much better than I have. So the wooden spoon. The wooden spoon method. So this is something that I was taught by my rune teacher. She sent me this wooden spoon to remind me that, mistakes will be made, but also you'll get a swift smack on the hand when mistakes are made. So this isn't a gentle way of learning the runes. There are people who have much gentler ways, but this is just how I've been taught. And to me, it makes sense for the runes that the runes, one, deserve respect. Two, they're a discipline, and they take a long time to learn. Something that's actually a quote from my rune teacher as well that I really love is, "The violin is not to blame for you not knowing how to play it." And this is something, something we struggle with in this faith is gatekeeping. It's all over the place. And it's something I've tried really hard not to be in the Wisdom of Odin. I really want to make sure I give you the information so that you can take it into your personal practice and learn from it, and not tell you there is only one way. I'm only telling you that this is how I've been taught the runes, and it's effective. So you can take it and run with it. Otherwise, go find another way. That's okay. This is not the only way to do things. I guess the best way to look at it, just like the violin thing, if you wanted to be a doctor, can you just walk into a hospital and be like, "I want to apply to be a doctor"? And they're like, "Oh, well, do you have a degree in being a doctor?" And then you're like, "Whoa, that's gatekeeping. How dare you gatekeep me from being a doctor?" Yeah, no, I want my doctors to actually have education in being a doctor. And so, with the runes, I think it's kind of the similar thing. When you go down the runes, it's a discipline. It takes many months and years. Like, you can pick up a lot right away. But truly, I believe from my own personal experiences, from talking with others, and from learning about the runes, they are a discipline. And they take a long time to learn, and that's okay. That's not gatekeeping. That is just understanding that some things take a long time to learn. So, I prepared you enough for this, so now we're finally here. So, from my rune teacher, a person must be proficient in the runes before making bind runes. So really, with this, understand the runes really well. If you're going to dive into making bind runes, you really need to understand their meanings, you really need to understand the divination, and the interactions between individual runes. Certain runes may not interact well with others or cancel out the positive effects of others as well. I also have a note from her: do not use bind runes blindly from the internet. So I'll put up a picture here of something I think many of us have seen. It's these generic bind runes that someone at some point has just made and says they have this value. You don't know that person, do you? And you don't know the intention they put behind these very own bind runes. Bind runes are a very personal thing, and it's very, the intention you put into the bind rune is really what they come out of it. Now, the person that made these may have had great intentions and it fully meant what these are, but they don't know you, they don't know your story, they don't know, the history of why you need this bind rune. And so, again, note from my rune teacher is to simply don't use bind runes you randomly find on the internet for magical purposes. Again, if you think they look cool, fine, get a tattoo of them, but don't go around saying like, "Oh, this one gives me wealth," I mean, honestly, it's probably just like getting a Chinese, symbol tattoo and being like, "Oh, this means peace and love," and really it means like, dumb American or something like that. I mean, I think it's a similar context. Just don't get random bind runes from the internet. Really get them from somebody that is really knowledgeable in them. Which isn't me. I don't, I've made occasional bind runes for people, I think only 2. I am not there yet to just start churning these out. It's a very personal and draining experience because you really need to know the person that you're making bind runes for. The 3 steps of creating bind runes, if you feel knowledgeable enough to actually go down this road, there is the creation, the analysis, and the activation of the rune as well. So the creation stage of making a bind rune is really asking the questions of what this is going to do. So, what do you want to accomplish? What runes are going to use and how many? And what form will this take? So to answer the first question, is this a love rune? Is this a protection rune? Is it for increasing health or strength or wisdom, or to make you more connected to Odin? Really figure out what you want this rune to do. And then once you figure that out, you can start determining what runes go with that action. If you want to connect with Odin more, make a rune with Anzus in it, with Algies, with Halgalaz, and then you also need to determine how many of those runes you're going to have in there as well. I mean, I've seen some bind runes that absolutely terrify me with like 48 runes in them, and then understanding the interpersonal connection between all the bind runes that interact within that spell as well. So there's obviously different ways to create bind runes. You can start with very simple ones, which obviously if you're first getting into this, I recommend starting with the simple ones. Don't go to the 50 bind rune spells right away. Again, don't try to play at an orchestra when you've played a violin for a day. It's one of those things that you got to practice, you got to start small, you got to play for one person, then 2 people, and then you can start doing the larger ones as well. So the next question of, what form does it take? So from what I can tell from research online, from research of the various Bindrunes out there, is that there are 3 different ways to actually kind of form them. So you have a stacked method, which is very simple. It's just Bindrune on top of Bindrune. If this was actually a magical one, this would be a stacked. It's really a simple Fehu Yera. Or even the Wisdom of Odin symbol is just 3 runes put on top of each other. This is probably where you should start if you're getting into Bindrunes for the first time, because it's really easy to, manage the interactions between these runes, and so stacking them on top of each other is probably the easiest, simplest Bindrune. And then you have the linear stave, which is what this Bindrune is, where the runes themselves are built on one line. Again, I think this is cool because this is an evidence we have from the past. That one rune stone I showed you is a vertical stacking of runes that, spell something out and to symbolize something. So maybe this was a spell, but we really can't say one way or another. Regardless, the stacking of Bindrunes is honestly, something that I'm a fan of because, again, it's really easy to kind of manage the interactions. It's quite simple. So this rune I actually made for the most part by myself. I knew I wanted, Wunyo, Fehu, and then I actually originally just had Rytho here. And what was recommended to me by my rune teachers to add another Rytho on the other side to also make an Othala. Since this, to me, was a tree, was how I was looking at it. That is the roots. And obviously, Othala being, estate, heritage, having that as the root symbol, I was like, boom, that makes sense. So you're definitely going to get into these really, out there ideas of why you're forming things together, but it's going to be this natural flow. And you're going to say, oh, I'm going to put another Rytho on the other side to represent both the journey and the ancestry and the roots of the tree. And, it's like, oh, that's awesome. So this is a spell. So as far as the meaning of this rune, I think I'll keep that to myself for right now, but this is a very deeply meaning thing, and I got this very early on in the Wisdom of Odin career. But yes, to me, this is a magical bind rune, and whereas this is just a symbol to me. Now, the third and final way to actually do a bind rune, at least from what I can tell, is a radial stave. And so this is something very similar to the Vegvasir, is where it has one central point and then the runes branch out from there. And this is when I've seen the runes get very complicated. And they absolutely terrify me. So this is when you can start having, 64 runes all coming off and then branching out. And I've seen very complicated spells, for this as well. So yeah, this is definitely you're the performing at the orchestra with your violin moment. Very complicated, and this is where it's going to be really hard to kind of manage the interactions, but obviously the effects can be quite strong. And this brings us to the second step. So that's all part of the creation, the idea, the doodles, getting everything right. And then the analysis part of this, it might seem simple at first, but really this is taking your time as you establish what this rune is and really analyzing the interactions between the individual runes. If you have a Wunyo rune right next to a Haugalaz rune, or branching off of it, that is possibly a negative interaction. And again, this is where my knowledge begins to become limited, and this is where it takes years of practice and understanding and learning to understand the interactions of the individual runes. And so, to me, having a Haugalaz, natural pain rune right next to a Wunyo rune, maybe not the best thing. So again, analyze those interactions between the runes. Really take your time in establishing it. Understand things like the roots. If I didn't have that there and it was just that, maybe this bind rune would have been less successful. But having the roots there to symbolize the tree even better makes it work more. Or at least to me, it makes it work more. It's just like the jar of dirt. If it helps, it helps. So the third and final stage of this, again, don't sleep on step 2. It might sound simple, but just respect the runes, understand the runes, take your time, and really analyze those differences. But on the third and final step, the actual activation of it. So this can kind of go several different ways, or a combination of many different ways. The one that I've been exploring more, at least in my own personal rune practice, is Galder practice. So actually singing the runes, singing their names out. And this is something that I have been learning, again, like I said, more recently, not necessarily for bind runes, but the runes in general. So especially when I do my more Germanic-based work, I sing the runes like Wunyo, Fehu, and then, honestly, I'll sing this rune quite a bit. Or, to certain gatherings, if it's a spring gathering, I'll sing, Yera, Fehu, what's another good, the Izaz maybe, and the runes for particular seasons, Izaz would be a really good winter rune, obviously. And so singing the runes gives them more power. The vibrations of saying their names is supposedly one of the things that gives them their magical properties. And so to actually activate a rune, you actually sing it into activation, so to speak. Now, again, this is just one way you can do it, or you can do it in a combination of ways. Another thing I think is important about activating a bind rune is calling upon certain deities or beings to necessarily assist you. Now, this could be a local spirit, it could be ancestors, it could be a deity, but be sure you, of course, respect these deities and these presences you're summoning. Offer gifts to them for their assistance in activating this rune. And again, that brings us into another thing, offerings, giving something in the activation of this rune. Something that I know Keenan did when he made my shield that hangs above my mantelpiece at home is he actually used ashes from an Odin ritual in the actual runes themselves of the shield. And again, this is where you're hitting the point. If you're still watching this video, you might be like, oh, that's all hogwash. I mean, at the end of the day, most spell work is, hogwash to people that understand spell work. But to me, it really means something that, someone sat down around a fire to an Odin ritual, and then they put the ashes mixed in with water into the shield carvings itself. That's pretty cool. Another thing you can kind of come into is, pigments, carving up rocks, making your own pigments as an offering, or even, it's like small bits of gold leaf, gold flakes in there. Actually carving into it. And naturally, there is also blood. That's up to you if you want to do it or not. Some people are, of course you have to use it. Some people don't use it at all. Again, that is up to you and your own personal safety. But to me, one thing that I do like about tattoos is, in all technicality, this is its own blood offering in its a way, because when you get a tattoo, especially me, I bleed a lot. So, that's why I do kind of like rune tattoos or bind rune tattoos that have magical purposes, because you are offering pain, time, and blood into it. But again, that is up to you, and obviously, be safe when you do it as well. But I know this is important to, many people's practices, and some people don't even use it at all. From my research and from what I know and what I've been told is those are the three main things you can do with activation. There are other ways. I'm sure other people have ways. And naturally, this is where please go down to the content section. If you feel comfortable talking about your explorations into the runes, go down below and actually, share with other people. Or, maybe not if you're in the same mindset that, not everyone should have access to, the bind runes. Like, you're not ready for the orchestra, kids. So maybe those don't belong in the section below. So I'm just really trying to help people, both in a way that, gets people in the right direction, but if you're wanting to explore more, this is kind of the directions you go. And once again, please check out that rune video. I do have the rune book recommendations from my rune teacher as well. So, go back and check out that video if you want to deep dive. Really, I just want to make this specifically for bind runes. But yeah, that's kind of it. So again, creation of the bind rune itself, the analysis, and then how you're activating it. Oh yeah, also think about where you're applying this as well, whether it's going to be a tattoo, whether it's going to go on bone, wood, stone, on a piece of paper that is going to be burned. Really think about what you're going to put this on as well, and that's really going to kind of also be part of the analysis stage, and understanding the interactions of the runes as well. So yeah, there is a lot to bind runes, and again, it's the orchestra. This is something that is more complicated. Don't be afraid to take those baby steps. When you first pick up that violin, so to speak, understanding the runes, understanding the notes of the violin, and then start, and then you can start learning how to divinate, and that'll help you a lot too. And that's kind of the stage I'm in personally. And then the next stages can be bind rune, simple bind rune craft. So there's a lot to the rune discipline, and I think it's definitely something that needs to be respected, taken, taken at your own pace. Again, I was taught if, you step outside the bounds, you try to create a bind rune too powerful, or divinate something you don't quite understand, or use runes you don't understand, you get that, God, that still hurts. You get that swift smack with a wooden spoon. And that's why, some people refer to this method of me teaching the runes as the wooden spoon method, because it's how I learned. But again, I think this is a very effective method as well. Regardless, thank you so much for joining me for this, I'm assuming, long video by the time I cut everything down. But I hope, again, this has been helpful for people that want to understand bind runes, at least at a basic level, and even for people that want to dive deeper into them. So like I said, I have several other videos on the runes, including the one where I answered community questions on the runes directly from the answers from my rune teacher. But yes, thank you very much for joining me, and until next time, and until the hall, Skull.